In this presentation, we're going to be looking at Viewport 2.0, Maya's high-performance hardware-accelerated display. Viewport 2.0 supports many of the things that software renderers can do directly in hardware. Viewport 2.0 now supports Maya's nParticles and particle instancing, as well as Maya's nHair, nCloth, Maya Fluid Effects and Maya Paint Effects, the Toon Shader, projection shaders, the wrinkle deformer. All of these things go into making Viewport 2.0 have a complete feature set that allows it now to be the default viewport renderer inside of Maya, which is really great because Viewport 2.0 has traditionally been really good at two things: super performance and very high fidelity to the look and feel of your scenes. So we're going to be using this environment to kind of explore some of the features that Viewport 2.0 brings to the table. The first one that we want to talk about is performance. So what we've got here is we've got an animation of our character basically crawling out of the water. And I want to accelerate the animation by using vertex caching. So this is an option inside of Viewport 2.0's. We'll go ahead and we're going to turn the vertex-based cache onto hardware. So this means it's going to get shoved to the GPU. And the first time that we play through the animation, Maya is going to evaluate the scene. It's going to find all the skin clusters in there, all the deforming pieces of geometry in there, and it's going to bake that information into a vertex cache that then is stored on the GPU. So by doing this, Maya no longer has to evaluate the deformations, and it just reads that information directly off the GPU. So the second time the animation plays through, you can see that it now plays at real time. So the next thing that we want to kind of talk about are some of the improvements that you can get to the look and feel of your scene by turning on some of the special features that Viewport 2.0 brings to the table. The first one that we're going to enable is going to be screen-based ambient occlusion. So as soon as I turn on that screen-based ambient occlusion, you can see all the little kind of shadow areas and the little ground patches that sort of show up. Just gives that scene that subtle little pop. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn on hardware-based anti-aliasing. So if you look around here, you'll see there's some pretty jaggy edges happening around here. Around his hair, it's a little noisy and jaggy. Obviously around the building or the tower edge here, we start to break up, especially down here on this water line. So as soon as I turn this on, we're now super sampling the scene up to 16 samples in this OpenGL scene. So the next thing that we're going to talk about really quickly is the shader that I have on my character's face. So if we zoom in on this character's face here and we look at this, this is actually using a shader effect shader that's got a translucence model built into it. So if we go ahead and we look at this in the attribute editor, you'll see that this is actually using a really very nice, sophisticated shader that was generated using Maya's shader effects. Again, shader effects can be represented in both DX11 and OpenGL. So this is the node-based shading tree that goes into generating this skin shader. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is one of the things that Viewport 2.0 can do that a software renderer would traditionally do. So I've got this water, and if you look at this water, I went ahead and I painted a texture map sort of where I wanted the shallow area to be a little bit more transparent. But if I rotate my camera up here, traditionally with water, when you look straight down, it becomes transparent. And then obviously as you get this kind of Fresnel effect happening or this facing ratio effect happening, when you look down low to the water out toward the horizon, it becomes opaque. So really what we want to do is we want to generate a shader that's going to represent that look and kind of have that functionality built in. And this is something that traditionally in a software render is really easy to do. And because Viewport 2.0 supports the utility nodes, the same shading network that we would build to do this in software will accurately be represented in Viewport 2.0. So if we just jump over to our node editor, you can see that I've already went ahead and built up a mirror of this shader. So it just started off as a blend shader that has a normal map for the water, that transparency map, and a little bit of color information being piped into it. It's also got this reflection map that's being piped in that's a high dynamic range reflection map. So what I've done is I've just got another shader that I built up that's just using a sampler info node. So that's going to get the facing ratio, basically which way the normal is facing compared to the camera. I'm shoving that into a ramp. So I'm going to use this ramp to modify the output range of what the facing ratio affects to make it behave the way I want. And that's just multiplied into that color or the alpha channel of that same texture map that I used to paint where the shallow areas are. And it's just simply assigned into this shader. So you can see the representation of it in the viewport ball here. Notice that this now represents ray tracing and reflections with the checkered background pattern. It will accurately distort or reflect the image. And if we jump into the ramp here and we start to look at this, now you'll notice when I go above, I have the ability to adjust sort of the effect of where does this happen? How abruptly does that transition effect happen from being opaque to being transparent? And how much is it going to go based on to the transparency based on the values that I set in this ramp. So again, it's just a really simple little effect, but the end result looks a lot more realistic as we start to transition, kind of if we zoom out here and really see this as we start to transition from seeing the glancing angle to seeing down from above. So a couple little things that we could do in software traditionally that now Viewport 2.0 supports, as well as the improvements that have been made to the ramp widget and the shader balls inside of Maya. So the next thing that we're going to talk about really quickly is a couple of the other options in Viewport 2.0. I mentioned the fact that the reflection on this water was using a high dynamic range image. Viewport 2.0 has the ability to work in a linear color space, which is exactly what I'm doing for this scene. So if we scroll down here, you'll see that I've got my gamma correction set to a value of 2.2, and I'm turned on to float rendering. So by having float rendering turned on in my viewport, and we can go up to 32-bit, I'm just doing half float for this scene. But by having this turned on, it allows, sort of the reflections not to get stepped down to a value of 0 to 1 if you're working with high dynamic range source material. It also gives you really nice subtle transparencies. Areas like around these clouds where I may get some banding or something like that, by having floating point turned on, it just gives us that extra range to not have banding and gradients and things like that, and you get that really nice kind of specular or reflection pop happening on that hotspot from that EXR file that we're using for the reflection map. So the next thing that we're going to talk about really quickly is something that's newly supported in Viewport 2.0, and that's Maya's fluid effects. So I wanted this scene to have sort of an overall volumetric feel to it. And to achieve that, what I did is I just added a fluid effect that fully encompasses my scene. So if we turn on the Maya fluid effects, looks like I might have that turned off in my channel box here. Let's turn that guy on. What I've got is I've got just a simple node, a Maya fluid node that gives me this really nice atmospheric effect. So you can see the effect of it when I turn it on and when I turn it off. And because that's just a Maya fluids node, if I wanted to modify its color, its shape, its size, all that stuff is going to accurately represent itself in the viewport. So I've grabbed that fluids node and I'll just start moving it up and down. So if I wanted the ground to get caught up in it, or just it to be, the volume, being 10 feet off the ground, I could adjust it. Or if I wanted to scale it down, I just switched into my scale tool. So I'm just playing around with that fluid effect to sort of dial in where I want that fog to live. And that's really what I did to get to that overall kind of volumetric feeling shot. So you can see the difference, especially on these buildings in the back, or these towers in the back. If I turn that fog off, it just gives it that really nice sort of ambient kind of volumetric feel. So the last thing that we want to talk about that's improved in Viewport 2.0 is the ability for it to have particles show up inside of it. So let's go ahead and turn on my spaceship. And we'll rewind our time slider here. So I've got this ship, and if we kind of zoom in here, you'll see on that ship I've actually got some emitters added into that guy. And Viewport 2.0 now supports particles, and it does some really interesting things, specifically with sprite-based particles. So if we play this back, this result, or this look that I have here that we're getting to, is because I'm basically turned this particle type to sprites, and we can actually take all of the rendering information from a shading network, apply it to that, and it'll accurately represent itself directly in the viewport. So let's go ahead and just grab that guy. Let's make sure that we have our ship set to be pickable. So we can grab this fluid shape, and again, we'll just jump into that node editor. We'll graph this. So what I've got going on here is just a really simple shader that I've applied to my sprite-based particles. And what I'm doing, the main thing that I'm doing is I'm using particle sampler info. So this allows you to query information about the particles. And what I'm doing is I'm getting the normalized age of these guys. So if we hit our 2 key on this and we zoom in on this, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing normalized age and I'm shoving that into a ramp. So this ramp is basically taking the birth of the particles, which is the beginning of the ramp, and the life of the particles, and adjusting transparency. We're taking all of these little nodes, these procedural nodes, and I'm shoving these into transparency. So the first thing we're doing is we're taking the life of the particles and we're multiplying that times a ramp. So obviously if I want them to die a little earlier or get a little more transparent sooner, I can just adjust that ramp. And Viewport 2.0 being able to render all of this stuff directly in real time is really, it's pretty awesome actually. So I'm taking the output of that ramp, and I wanted to, these are sprites, right? So what I wanted to have the texture map of that sprite be was just a simple fractal. So I'm using a Maya fractal, so obviously as we adjust that, you can see the effect of what that fractal looks like. So because they're sprites, they're little cards, they're little square cards, so I didn't want that fractal to have abrupt square edges. So I'm taking the output of that fractal, and I'm multiplying that times another ramp, and this one's just set to a circular ramp. So this is basically taking that square and turn it into a circle with like a kind of a soft edge to it. And again, I can use these ramp widgets to fine-tune and adjust exactly how big I want that to look. So to finish this off, looks like my fluids got turned off. Let's turn those guys back on. The last thing we're going to do is just turn on depth of field, something else that's also supported inside of Viewport 2.0. Looks like we need to adjust that a little bit. Let's go ahead and grab our camera, and we'll just push that depth of field out a little bit. Something to like 150. So we can rewind this, jump to full screen, play it back. So you can see the effects of all this basically being rendered in real time. Viewport 2.0, just totally awesome. Let's just put this back to 100. Let it loop a couple times. So there goes the ship hitting the cower. So these are the things that Viewport 2.0 brings to the table. Again, it's now the default viewport renderer inside of Maya 2015. Hopefully you guys enjoy it.